Okay, so have you ever had like that moment when you're trying to say something simple in English, and it just like it doesn't quite come out right?
Yeah.
Maybe you said something like, "I'll pick you at 6" instead of "I'll pick you up at 6." Like it's close, but it's just that like little word that makes all the difference.
Yeah, that's such a great example of the sort of like linguistic mysteries that we're going to try to unravel today. It really highlights how interesting and kind of tricky English phrasal verbs can be.
Totally. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. It's all about these phrasal verbs, these combinations where you have a verb and it gets joined by like a preposition like up or on, or sometimes an adverb, and suddenly it creates a completely new meaning.
And to really kind of understand how these work, we're going to be listening in on a conversation between two English language learners, Alex and Sophia. Our source material is basically this chat they have in a coffee shop where Sophia is sort of helping Alex make sense of some of these common but really confusing phrasal verbs.
So this is not just your typical grammar lesson. Understanding phrasal verbs is really super important if you want to sound more natural when you're speaking English, and also just to avoid those like awkward misunderstandings, we're going to pull out some of the most essential ones to help you understand and communicate better. So, okay, let's jump right into it. What's the first challenge that Alex comes up against?
Well, it starts with that exact scenario you described. Alex says, "I will pick you at 8 p.m. And Sophia immediately jumps in to correct him and says, "I will pick you up at 8 p.m. And it's like that tiny little word up that totally changes what the verb to pick means.
It's crazy how powerful just that one little word can be. And Sophia explains that what Alex has stumbled on is called a phrasal verb. It's when you have a verb and you add a preposition or an adverb to it, and boom, you've got a whole new meaning, something you would never guess just from the individual words themselves. Like it's not just pick, meaning to choose, up, meaning upwards, right.
Right. It's like when you put them together, they create this very specific action of collecting someone. And what's interesting is that these combinations, they become so natural for native English speakers. We don't even like think about the individual words anymore. It's like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Think of up here as like adding a sense of completion to the action of picking, like you're gathering someone.
That makes a lot of sense, that idea of gathering.
Yeah.
So Sophia starts taking Alex through some of the most important phrasal verbs. Let's start with that first group she talks about where the meaning's pretty clear. And the first one they go over is pick up.
Yeah. And Sophia, she gives a really clear definition: to collect someone or something. And she uses some super helpful examples like, "Can you pick up some milk from the grocery store?" Or, "I'll pick you up from your house before the movie." So it's not just about choosing. It's about obtaining or fetching something or someone.
Which is totally different from just pick on its own, as Alex points out.
Yeah.
Okay, another one that's like essential is turn off.
Oh yeah, that's a fundamental one. The main meaning, as Sophia explains, is to stop a machine or a light. She gives the example, "Please turn off the lights when you leave the room." It's a simple action, right? You're stopping the operation of something. Think of off here as like indicating a state of being not active anymore.
Right. It's like you're making it inactive. But here's where things get a little bit more, complex.
Yeah.
Because Sophia, she points out right away that turn off can have another meaning as well.
Yes, exactly. She mentions that it can also mean to like disgust or repel someone. For example, "His rude behavior really turns me off." So this is a really good example of how the context is so important with phrasal verbs. The same exact words can have completely different meanings depending on how they're used.
It's like the English language likes to keep us on our toes. So another phrasal verb that comes up in their conversation is run out of.
Right, and that one means to have no more of something left. Like in Sophia's example, "We've run out of sugar. Could you buy some more?" And Alex, he makes this really interesting connection here. He notices the difference between run, meaning to move quickly, and then run out of, which is more about, like depleting a supply of something. And that out signifies that you've reached the end. There's nothing left.
That's a helpful way to think about it, that preposition. It really changes the focus, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like it goes from the action of running to the state of having nothing left.
Yeah.
Okay, so then they talk about look after.
So look after means to take care of someone or something. And the example Sophia gives is, can you look after my plants while I'm on vacation? And Alex compares it to babysitting, which is a really good analogy, right? Because it's about providing care and supervision.
Yeah.
And that after suggests, keeping an eye on something or someone, making sure they're okay.
Right. It conveys that sense of responsibility. And the last one in this first group that they cover is give up.
Which means to stop trying or to quit. Like, don't give up on learning English. Alex actually shares that he almost gave up on trying to understand phrasal verbs, which is something I think a lot of learners can relate to. But Sophia's encouragement really fits with that meaning, right? To not give up.
Definitely. I mean, they can feel so overwhelming sometimes. But she's like, hey, stick with it. Okay, so we've looked at some of the phrasal verbs where the core meaning is pretty clear. But now let's get into the ones that are a little bit trickier. The phrasal verbs that have multiple meanings. We already touched on turn off before. What's another one that fits into this category?
Well, put off is a great example of a phrasal verb that can have a couple of different meanings. The first meaning, as Sophia explains, is to postpone something, like they put off the meeting until Friday. So it's about delaying or rescheduling something.
Right, so it's like moving something to a later time. But that's not the only meaning, is it?
No, it's not. Sophia also points out that put off can mean to discourage or deter someone. And she gives the example, his negative attitude really put me off joining the team. So you can see these are quite distinct meanings. In the first example, put off refers to a change in time. But in the second example, it's all about a change in feeling or motivation. And this kind of brings up a question for our listeners like that. How do you know which meaning is intended?
And the answer, as we've already kind of hinted at, is context. You really have to pay attention to the other words in the sentence and the overall situation to figure out if someone's delaying an event or if something is making them feel discouraged. What's another phrasal verb that has these like multiple personalities?
Take off is another common one. The first meaning is to remove clothing. For example, please take off your coat and make yourself comfortable. It's that physical action of detaching something.
Pretty straightforward. Yeah. Just a physical action.
But then we have its other really common meaning when we're talking about a plane leaving the ground, like the plane will take off in about 15 minutes. So those two meanings are quite different, but both are very frequent. That off implies removal in the first sense and separation from the ground in the second.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to mix those two up.
Yeah.
Another one that Sophia brings up is bring up.
Yes, and this one has two important meanings as well. The first is to mention a topic in a conversation, like that warning, please don't bring up that embarrassing story again. It's about introducing a subject into a conversation.
We all have those topics we don't want to revisit. So what's the second meaning?
The second one is to raise a child, like she was brought up in a small village in the countryside. So again, two quite different concepts, but connected by that same phrasal verb. And here the up carries a sense of nurturing and guiding someone you know through their childhood.
It's amazing how that one little preposition can totally change the direction of the meaning. So we've gone through some of the trickier ones that have multiple meanings. Let's move on to group number 3, more common phrasal verbs that can really help to build your vocabulary. Sophia covers quite a few here. Let's start with break down.
So break down can mean to stop working. This usually refers to machines or vehicles, like, my car broke down on the way to work this morning. You know that feeling of frustration when something just stops functioning?
I hope that doesn't happen to anyone, but
Yeah.
it's important to be able to describe it if it does. So is there another meaning of breakdown.
Yeah, there is. It can also mean to lose emotional control, often to the point of crying. Like she broke down crying when she heard the news. So we have a mechanical breakdown and an emotional breakdown. And it's interesting how down can signify a collapse of either a machine or a person's emotional state.
That is interesting. Okay, what about call off?
Call off means to cancel something that was planned. Like they had to call off the outdoor concert because of the heavy rain. And Alex makes the distinction here between this and just call, which is, phoning someone. Here, off signals that you're bringing something to an end.
That tiny off changes everything. It's no longer about making a phone call. It's about stopping something that was going to happen. What about find out?
Find out means to discover or learn information. Like, I just found out that the flight has been delayed. And again, Alex makes the comparison here between find out and just find, which means simply to locate something. Out adds that element of like uncovering new information.
Right, that feeling of coming to know something that you didn't know before. Another common one is go on.
Yeah, go on can mean to continue doing something, like please go on with your presentation. But it also has another common meaning,
Which is?
It can also mean to happen or to take place. Like if you ask someone what's going on over there. So depending on the context, go on can either mean to proceed with something or it can be about something that is occurring.
That makes sense. Okay, so how about set up?
Set up usually means to arrange or establish something. For example, they set up a new company last year. It suggests, creating or organizing something.
A pretty important verb when you're talking about businesses and organizations. So then we have turn up. We've already seen turn off. Does turn up have more than one meaning as well?
It sure does. One meaning of turn up is to increase the volume of something. Like, could you please turn up the music a little?
So it's the opposite of turn down.
Got it.
What's the other meaning of turn up?
It can also mean to appear unexpectedly, as in he turned up at the party even though he hadn't been invited. So we've got increasing volume and also just suddenly arriving. It's amazing how that little up can work in both of those contexts.
It's all about appearing, whether it's sound or a person. Okay, I want to talk about this one because I think a lot of English learners find it really useful. Look forward to.
Ah, yes. Look forward to is about anticipation and excitement about something that's going to happen in the future. Like, I'm really looking forward to my vacation next month. And as Alex points out, it has a very positive feeling associated with it.
Right. It's about looking ahead with pleasure. So on the flip side, we have put up with.
Put up with means to tolerate something unpleasant or annoying, as in, I can't put up with his constant complaining anymore. So it suggests that sense of enduring something difficult. And up with, together, create this meaning of bearing something alongside another person or situation.
A very useful one when you're feeling frustrated with something.
Yeah.
Okay, then there's get along with.
Get along with means to have a good relationship with someone. Like, I get along really well with my new neighbors. And once again, Alex distinguishes between just get, meaning to receive, and get along with, which is about being friendly and agreeable with someone.
That feeling of having a nice, easy connection with someone. What about come across?
Come across has a couple of main meanings. The first is to find something by chance. Like, I came across an old photograph while I was cleaning. So it's about finding something unexpectedly.
Right, like an accidental discovery. What's the second meaning?
The second meaning is to give a particular impression. Like, he comes across as a bit shy at first, but he's actually very friendly. It's about how someone is perceived by others.
So it can be about finding something physically or giving an impression socially. Wow, we're going through a lot of these. What's next?
Work out is another one that has a couple of meanings. One meaning is To exercise. Like, I work out at the gym 3 times a week.
The classic way to stay in shape. And the other meaning.
The other meaning is to solve a problem or to have things turn out in a positive way. Like, don't worry, I'm sure everything will work out in the end.
That sense of like revolution, finding a solution. And the very last one on Sophia's list is fallout.
Fallout means to have an argument and stop being friends. For example, they had a big argument and have completely fallen out. And Alex points out that it definitely has a negative feeling associated with it.
Right. It definitely implies that there's been like a break in a relationship. So after all of these examples, what are some of the key takeaways that come out of Alex and Sophia's conversation that our listeners should really pay attention to?
Well, the first and most important point is that phrasal verbs are like absolutely essential if you want to really understand and speak natural English. You're going to come across them all the time in conversations, in movies, in books, everywhere.
It's like this secret code that unlocks a deeper level of understanding.
Yeah. And secondly, as we've seen with so many of these examples, context is super, super important. You can't just look at the verb and the preposition or the adverb by themselves. You have to really consider the other words in the sentence, the overall situation, to understand the correct meaning.
It's like being a detective, looking for clues in the surrounding words.
Exactly. And then finally, and this is probably the most important takeaway for you, the listener, practice, there's no magic bullet here. It takes exposure, it takes active use, and it takes, consistent effort.
And that brings us to how Sophia helps Alex reinforce what he's learning. She gives him this little quiz to test his understanding.
Yeah, it's such a clever way to have him apply that new knowledge right away. She asks him to fill in the blank with the correct phrasal verb. For example, she says, I need to my brother from soccer practice at 5 p.m. And Alex correctly answers, pick up.
And another example was, please, the music, it's much too loud, where the correct answer is turn down. Mm-hmm. It's such a simple way, but it really helps to solidify the meanings.
Totally. And there are a few others we've of milk, so I need to go to the store, and the answer is run out. And when he heard the surprising news with the correct answer being broke down, and then they decided to bro their picnic because of the forecast for thunderstorms with the correct phrasal verb call off, Alex gets them all right, which is really encouraging, right? It shows how quickly your understanding can improve when you really focus and practice.
That's really inspiring to see his progress. It shows that even though they can feel overwhelming, phrasal verbs are definitely learnable.
Absolutely. And then Sophia, she ends the conversation with some really good advice for learners. What are some of those final tips that she shares?
Well, she first says to make an effort to use one new phrasal verb every single day in your conversations. So it's about actively putting into practice what you're learning.
Yeah, that's a great way to force yourself to not just memorize, but to actually use it, in real life.
Yeah. Her second piece of advice is to really pay attention to phrasal verbs when you're watching movies or reading books in English. That way you can see how native speakers use them naturally, in different situations.
Immersion is so valuable. Seeing these phrases being used in real life gives you a much deeper understanding than just, looking at definitions in a dictionary.
Totally. And then her last tip is to keep learning. Language learning is a journey. And every bit of progress you make is a step in the right direction.
Exactly. Don't be afraid of the challenge. Be patient. And don't get discouraged by the complexity. Every phrasal verb you learn is a victory.
So to sum it all up, the main takeaway from our deep dive today is that, English phrasal verbs might seem tricky and maybe even a little scary at first. But if you focus on understanding some of these core examples that we've talked about, the logic behind how they work, you can make huge progress in your ability to understand and speak English fluently and confidently.
And with this understanding, you can navigate everyday English so much more easily, and you'll definitely avoid those moments of confusion, like that pick you at 8 example we started with.
Exactly. So as you go about your day-to-day, start noticing those little combinations of words. Pay attention to how those tiny changes in a verb can create such big changes in meaning. What other subtle linguistic nuances are hiding in plain sight, just waiting to be discovered?
Yeah.
Definitely something to think about.